The moon gave the water a false promise. It slicked the surface of the agua de cielo, the heaven spring, making it look like a fresh pour of molten silver. But there was no silver. The only riches there were the stars caught in its reflection, and the water itself, in the Arizona Territory, in the year 1881. Water was a thing holier than any metal. This was the San Miguel Valley, a place cracked by drought. The wind was a constant preacher, shouting sermons of grit and sand until the sky turned a pale, sickly brown. It was a mean wind that whipped the faces of the poor, and it did not bother the rich. Out east, beyond the ridge, you could hear the sound that changed the world. It was not thunder. It was the steady, relentless thud, thud, thud of heavy hammers. Zebediah Pike's private railroad was coming through. A steel snake aimed at the heart of Apache land and the dry grazing pastures of men who had come west with nothing but hope, which was now as thin as their cattle. Honor McCrae owned the rotten shack beside that spring. It was all she had, left to her by an uncle she never knew. A man who had died chasing the very silver that was not there. The shack was mostly wind. The boards gaped, and the roof leaked starlight. But it had the spring, and in Las Moras, the cluster of adobe and raw lumber that called itself a town. Owning the agua de cielo was suddenly a dangerous thing. Honor was the town schoolteacher, a woman quiet as dust, but stubborn as the granite hills. In Las Moras, they had a name for a woman who had passed 25, who would not accept a clumsy proposal from a drunk ranch hand, who would not lower her eyes when a man spoke. They called her a virgin. And because she served no man, because she spent her time teaching girls imagine, teaching girls to read the good book for themselves, they added another word, worthless. The whispers followed her when she bought her monthly flour. Worthless virgin. Too plain, too proud. She knew what they said. She knew they thought her a fool for living alone out here, so close to the path the Apache used. She ignored it. She had her small class of children, mostly the ones whose parents could not pay, and she had her duty. Nantan Kai knew this land differently. He was Apache, a man who had worn the blue coat of a cavalry scout for 2 seasons before the bile of it choked him. He had watched them lie, watched them break promises written on paper that meant nothing, and he had come home. He had returned to his people, carrying a silence as heavy as the rifle he no longer oiled. He was the watcher, the guardian of the old paths. His responsibility was the spring. It was not just water. It was a place of ceremony, a place where the ancestors drank. He saw the woman in the shack. He saw everything. Las Moras was a town strangling on its own leash, and Zebediah Pike held the end of it. Pike was a man built of railroad ties and pig iron, a man who saw the valley not as a home, but as an entry in a ledger. He smiled wide in the church pew every Sunday, his wallet thick with the town's future. His partners were simple and effective. Sheriff Clegg, a man whose badge was merely a polished ornament for Pike's will, enforced the laws that suited the railroad. And then there was Father Devereaux, a man who preached humility for the poor and divine right for the rich. He used his pulpit to soothe the restless, to assure them that Pike's progress was God's plan, all while carefully hiding the sharp edges of the greed that drove it all. The trouble, when it started, began as a whisper, like they always do. The talk of silver at the spring had been a joke for years, but suddenly the joke changed. The rumor, slick and fast, was that Honor McCrae was not just a poor schoolteacher. She was hiding gold, down her well, some said, buried under the floorboards. Said others, it was a foolish, cruel lie, but it served a purpose. Last Tuesday, the surveyors came. They did not speak to her. They just hammered 4 new wooden stakes into the ground, their boots crushing her small patch of wild thyme. The stakes were bright yellow, a fresh, raw wound against the land. They were not just near her shack. They were on her claim, marking a line that sliced off the spring itself. It was the first move, the legal boot before the kick. Honor had her own rituals. She was not a fool. She knew who walked the high ridges when the moon was thin. She knew the sound of a moccasin on stone was different from a boot. Every third night, she would take a small cake of cornmeal, the kind her mother used to make, and a pinch of precious salt. She would walk to the flat red rock that overlooked the spring path, hidden from the main trail. She would leave the offering there. It was not a bribe. It was not a plea. It was a greeting, a simple nod across a divide that the men in town filled with bullets and hate. She was just saying, I am here. I am not a threat. Some nights, when the wind died and the hammering stopped, she heard it, a sound that was half song, half chant, drifting from the high canyons where the spring was born. It was a sound so old it made the railroad hammers seem like a child's toy. It scared her, a little, but it also made her feel less alone. Her shack was a poor defense. Inside, the air was always dry, smelling of dust and the faint, sweet scent of the dried herbs she hung from the rafters, on a small, unsteady table. She kept her one true inheritance, not the land, not the shack, a string of blue glass beads, worn smooth, that had belonged to her mother. It was her altar. The beads, a worn Bible, and a tin cup. This was her line against the world, against the whispers, against the sound of the hammers, which seemed to get closer every day, a ticking clock threatening to shatter her small, quiet life. She stood at the open doorway, which was just a hole in the wall, looking at those new yellow stakes. They gleamed in the twilight. She was one woman. She had no gun she knew how to use well. She had no money. She had no man to stand for her. The town called her worthless. Pike's men saw her as an insect. A sudden, cold anger settled in her chest. It was not a hot, reckless fire, but a cold, hard stone. They would not take this water. This water did not belong to Zebediah Pike, or to Father Devereaux's convenient God, or to her. It belonged to the land. It belonged to the thirsty cattle of the dirt-poor ranchers. It belonged to the children who came to her school with cracked lips. It belonged to the unseen singers in the hills. She, Honor McCrae, would keep it for them. She did not know how. She only knew that she would. She was alone, but she would stand. As the last light died, she walked to the spring. She knelt by its edge, the damp cold seeping through her thin dress. She looked down. The moon was high. The surface was a perfect mirror, shining, bright as a newly minted coin. It looked like silver. Yes, but Honor dipped her hand in. It was just water. It was just starlight. And it was everything. The sound that woke her was not the wind, and it was not the distant hammers. It was the scrape of a boot on the dry rotted board of her porch. Honor McCrae was upright in her cot before her eyes were fully open. The thin blanket clutched to the collar of her nightdress. The ropes of the cot groaned in the silence. A shadow, thick and broad, blocked the moonlight from the open doorway. It was a man, and he smelled of stale whiskey and the rank sweat of fear. He was not Apache. He was one of them. A face she had seen lounging outside the Las Moras saloon. A man whose eyes always lingered on her with a greasy, assessing stare. He stepped inside. The floorboards cried out under his weight. "Where is it, schoolmarm?" His voice was a low, rough growl, too loud for the small space. He was looking for the gold, the phantom silver. "Pike says you are sitting on the glitter. Hand it over." She scrambled backward, her bare feet hitting the cold dirt floor. "Get out!" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Get out of my house!" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your house." He took another step, his eyes adjusting to the dark. He saw the small, unsteady table that held her mother's things. With a sweep of his thick arm, he sent the blue beads, the worn Bible, and the tin cup crashing to the floor, looking for the gold, worthless virgin. He lunged for her. He was not fast, just big. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her skin. Honor did not scream. There was no one to hear but the wind. and the wind was not on her side. She reacted with the desperation of a cornered animal. Her free hand fumbled on the table, finding the cold glass base of her oil lamp. It was heavy, half full. She swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The glass struck his shoulder and shattered. Oil precious. Expensive kerosene splashed across his chest and sprayed onto the dry floorboards. The lit wick, still burning, fell into the puddle. The floor erupted in a sudden, terrifying whoosh of orange flame. The man roared. It was a sound of pure, animal panic. He beat at his chest, where the oil had soaked his shirt. He was suddenly no longer a predator. He was just a fool on fire. He stumbled back, howling, crashing through the doorway and disappearing into the night. A trail of curses and the smell of burnt cloth left behind him. The fire, however, stayed. It licked up the wall, feeding hungrily on the dry, brittle wood of the shack. Honor coughed, the smoke stinging her eyes. She grabbed her sleeping blanket from the cot and began beating at the flames, but it was a small, useless gesture. The fire was spreading too fast. The dry wood, baked by a decade of Arizona sun, caught like tinder. She was going to lose it. She was going to lose the only thing she had. A second shadow filled the doorway. This one was different. It did not lunge. It did not smell of whiskey. It was silent, and it moved with a speed that was not hurried, but absolute. Nantan Kai stepped into the smoke. He carried a heavy hide bucket, dripping with water, which he must have been drawing from the spring. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He moved past her and threw the water onto the base of the flames. The hiss was violent. The fire died back, steaming and spitting, leaving a blackened, smoking patch on the floor and wall. He and she were alone in the small, charred space. Honor was shaking so hard her teeth clicked. She clutched the ruined, singed blanket to her chest. This was the man the town feared, the man they called a savage, the man whose people were blamed for every lost cow and every dry well. His eyes were not on her. They were on the floor. He knelt, his movement fluid and quiet. The attacker's clumsy sweep had scattered her mother's beads. Several had rolled into the puddle of water and ash near the burned boards. Nantan Kai, the Apache warrior, reached down and picked one up, a single, small, blue glass bead. He held it in the center of his palm, turning it over in the moonlight that now streamed, unobstructed, into the shack. For a fraction of a second, his face, which looked as if it were carved from the same red rock as the canyons, changed. It was not a smile. It was the easing of a line, a flicker of memory. A white woman. Years ago, when he was a boy dying of a fever the army doctor said was fatal. A woman in a blue coat, a healer, who had pressed a bead just like this into his hand. A seed of the sky. She had called it, her voice kind, to remind you that you are alive under it. He looked up at Honor, truly seeing her for the first time. He had seen the offerings on the red rock. He had smelled the fresh cornmeal. He had known someone left them, someone who was not an enemy. Now he looked at this woman, trembling in her nightdress, her face smudged with soot, and he understood. She was not Pike. She was not the railroad. He rose to his feet, carefully. He placed the single blue bead back on the table, the only thing he had saved. The sound of hoofbeats, frantic and heavy, broke the silence. Shouting followed. Sheriff Clegg arrived, his great belly spilling over his saddle horn, his pistol already drawn as he burst into the shack. He took in the scene in one damning glance. Honor, her state of undress, the singed blanket, the charred, wet floor, and Nantan Kai, standing silent, a hide bucket in his hand. An Apache warrior in a white woman's shack at midnight. Well, well, Clegg sneered, his eyes raking over Honor with a look that stained her. Looks like we found the source of the trouble. I knew it. All this trouble in the valley, it all starts with the damned Indians. He put the fire out, Honor said, her voice hoarse from the smoke. Someone else, a white man. He attacked me." "Do not tell me," Clegg interrupted, waving his pistol, not at Nantan, but in his general direction. "You, Redskin, get off this property, now. You are trespassing." Nantan Kai did not look at the sheriff. He held Honor's gaze for 1 second longer. Then, as silently as he had arrived, he was gone. He did not walk out the door. He simply receded into the night, and the space where he had been was empty. Clegg holstered his pistol, his full attention settling on Honor. "You see, ma'am, this is what happens. You are out here, alone, unprotected. That savage could have... Well, you are lucky I arrived." "It was a white man," Honor insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "He smelled of whiskey. He was one of Pike's men." Clegg spat onto the charred floor. "You are hysterical. Ma'am, that is the smoke talking. Now, I have a paper for you. Mr. Pike was worried something like this might happen. He wants to protect you. He wants to do the Christian thing." He fumbled inside his coat and produced a folded paper. "You just sign this. It gives Mr. Pike's company temporary rights to manage the spring. Just for security. To keep the riffraff out. For your protection." Honor stared at the paper, then at the sheriff's fleshy, impatient face. "Protection." "You sign it," Clegg said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And I will post a guard out here tomorrow. One of our men." "The man who attacked me, was he one of your men?" "Sheriff." Clegg's smile vanished. "You watch your mouth, girl. You are on your own, and any trouble that finds you from here on, well, you found it first." Honor pushed her damp hair back from her face, leaving a streak of black soot across her forehead. "I will not sign it. Get out of my house. Sheriff." His eyes went small and hard. He tipped his hat in a gesture of pure mockery. "Have it your way, virgin." He turned and left, his boots heavy on her porch. The next day was Sunday. Honor did not go to town for services. She spent the morning on her hands and knees, scrubbing the black char from her floorboards. The smell of smoke was burned into the wood. It would not leave. Around noon, the town came to her. It was not a mob, not this time. It was worse. It was an official proceeding. Zebediah Pike himself rode out on a fine black horse. He was followed by Sheriff Clegg, by Father Devereaux, and by a dozen men carrying shovels and measuring chains. Pike dismounted. He was a large man, dressed in a clean black suit, his beard neatly oiled. He looked like a painting of progress. He removed his hat and smiled at Honor as if she were a child he was fond of. "Miss McCrae," he said, his voice booming for all to hear, "a terrible, terrible business. Last night, it confirms my deepest fears. This area, it is unstable, unsafe." "The only thing unstable, Mr. Pike, was your man who tried to burn me from my home," Honor said, standing in her doorway, the scrub brush still in her hand. Pike's smile tightened, just for a moment. He ignored her words. "We have decided, for the good of the entire valley, that the Agua de Cielo must be properly managed. My engineers are here to measure the flow. We will be erecting a small, temporary dam, just to get the metrics, you understand." A man at the back of the crowd, a poor rancher named Silas, whose children came to her school, stepped forward anxiously. "A dam, Mr. Pike. But sir, that spring is all that feeds the lower pastures, my cattle." "Temporary, Silas, temporary," Pike said, radiating false paternal warmth. "We must understand our resources to improve them. The railroad is bringing prosperity to us all, my friend. But it needs water. The town needs water. This is God's plan." Honor dropped the brush. It clattered on the porch. She walked out of the shack, past Pike, until she was standing at the edge of the crowd, facing her neighbors. She was still wearing her oldest dress, stained with soot and lye. "He is lying," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the afternoon air. The crowd went utterly silent. The men with shovels stopped. Zebediah Pike turned, his face flushing a deep red. He does not want to measure the water. Honor continued, looking at Silas, at the other drawn faces. He wants to stop it. He wants to kill your pastures. Silas, he wants to choke the Apache from their path. He wants you all so thirsty, so broken, that you will sell him your land for the price of a train ticket. Someone gasped. Father Devereaux stepped forward, his face a mask of pious sorrow. Miss McCrae, Honor, that is a grievous, a sinful accusation. Zebediah Pike is a benefactor to this community. This spring, Honor said, turning to face the water, feeds us all. It is not his stock. It is not for sale. It does not belong to him. A woman in the back, the wife of the saloon keeper, let out a high, cruel laugh. Listen to her. The delusional virgin thinks she is a queen. She is telling us what to do. Another man grumbled. The worthless teacher. Pike raised his hand, a picture of a patient man deeply wounded. I see. The woman is unwell, hysterical, from her ordeal. He gave her a look of cold pity. Do not worry. Miss McCrae, we will proceed, for the good of all. He nodded to his men. Begin the survey. They left her there, standing by the water, surrounded by the new survey stakes. She watched them begin to dig. She felt the hot, angry tears well up, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. She felt, rather than saw, him. He was on the high ridge, a still, dark silhouette against the bright afternoon sun. Nantan Kai, sitting on his horse, watching. He had seen it all. He rode down, not all the way to her, but close enough that she would not have to shout. He stopped his horse 20 yards away. You spoke true, he said. His voice was low, like rocks moving under a deep stream. It will not matter, Honor said, her voice thick. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. They will build it. Yes, he said. It was not agreement. It was a statement of fact. They will build. Will you stop them? She asked, a sudden, desperate hope rising in her. Your people, this is your sacred path. Nantan Kai looked at the men digging by the spring, their shovels glinting. Then he looked at her. I will not start a war I cannot finish. I will not give them the excuse to bring the blue-coat cavalry. He paused, his gaze returning to the water. But he is wrong. The dam is not temporary. He looked away from the spring, to the dry, cracked earth of the valley floor. If the dam rises, he said, so quietly she almost did not hear him, the roots will die, not just the trees, all the roots. He turned his horse in one fluid motion and was gone, riding back toward the high canyons. He had offered no promises. He had offered no help. He had only given her a warning that confirmed her deepest fears. She was alone, completely alone. She went back inside her shack. The smell of smoke and char was everywhere. Despair, a cold, heavy thing, tried to settle on her shoulders. No. She would not. If they wanted metrics, she would give them metrics. Honor walked to her small wooden trunk. She pulled out a fresh, blank ledger book, the one she had saved for her school accounts. She found her bottle of black ink and a clean pen nib. She walked back out to the spring, past the digging men, who ignored her. She found a flat, sun-warmed rock near the deepest part of the pool. She sat, opened the book to the first page, and wrote the date, 1881. She dipped the pen. Morning. The water level is 2 inches below the high moss line. The flow is steady. The water is clear. 3 finches and a hawk came to drink. It was not a gun. It was not a legal paper. It was not a prayer. It was just the truth, written in plain black ink. It was her first piece of evidence. She would not leave. She would watch. She sat there until the sun began to dip, writing down her small, simple observations. The sound of the dam workers was a dull scrape and thud behind her. The wind picked up, carrying the world with it. It blew from the east, from the railroad line. It carried a fine, gray dust that settled on her hands, on the blank page of her book, and on her cheek. It did not feel like dust. It felt like ash, a cold promise of the fire and the steel that was coming to swallow the valley whole. It took less than a week for the lie to find its fire. A wagon carrying lumber and iron fittings for the dam, traveling from the railroad depot to the spring, was found overturned 3 miles west of Las Moras. The driver was missing, and the supplies were scattered. Before the dust had even settled, Sheriff Clegg was in the saloon, buying around and telling anyone who would listen that it was an Apache raid. "Clear as day," he announced, slamming his glass on the bar. "They scalped the driver. I wager they want to stop progress. They want to stop us." By noon, the story was gospel. By 3 o'clock, Zebediah Pike had hired a dozen new security men, rough-looking men with new rifles who had arrived on the morning train, as if summoned by the news before it even happened. Their first official duty was not to hunt the raiders. It was to visit the school. Honor was in the middle of a reading lesson with her 7 pupils. She was teaching them the word justice from the worn pages of her Bible when the shadows fell across the floor. 3 of the new men stood in the doorway. They did not remove their hats. Their leader, a tall, gaunt man with a face like cured leather and eyes the color of a muddy river, was Lewis Hatch. He was Pike's new foreman, his second in command, the man who did the things Pike was too clean to touch. Hatch leaned against the doorframe, a piece of straw working between his yellow teeth. He looked at the children, then at Honor. "School's out, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, pleasant drawl that held no pleasure at all. The children froze. Little Silas, the rancher's boy, started to tremble. "We are in the middle of our lessons," Honor said, her voice quiet but rigid. She stood from her stool, placing herself between the men and the children. "You are not welcome here." "Oh, but we are," Hatch said, taking a step inside. The children cringed. "Mister, Pike is very concerned about security, especially for the children, seeing as how the Redskins are on the warpath, incited by, well, who knows what." His eyes rested on Honor. "We are just here to make sure everyone stays safe." He walked, casual as a man in his own parlor, to the water bucket by the door. He dipped the ladle in and took a long, noisy drink. "But this is the problem. See?" he said, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. "You are teaching them out here, right next to the Indian path, right next to the spring they are all riled up about. It is irresponsible." "Get out," Honor said. Hatch smiled. He dropped the ladle back into the bucket with a splash. "We will be back, every day, just to watch over the children." He looked at her, his smile fading. "Or maybe just to watch over you." He turned and left. His 2 men followed, their rifles heavy on their shoulders. Honor had to pry the children's fingers from their desks. She walked each of them home, one by one, watching the ridges the entire time. When she returned to the schoolhouse, it was empty, but the smell of Hatch's cigar smoke lingered, a foul stain in the air. That Sunday, the town of Las Moras was given its moral orders. Father Devereaux stood at his pulpit, his hands clasped, his face a mask of sorrowful concern. He did not look at the pews. He looked at the cross above his head, as if receiving his words directly from on high. "In times of trial," he boomed, his voice filling the small adobe church, "the flock is tested. Satan does not come to us with horns and a pitchfork. My friends, no, he comes in the most pleasing of forms." The congregation shifted. Zebediah Pike sat in the front pew, his head bowed in perfect piety. "He comes as a voice of dissent," Father Devereaux declared, his voice rising. "He comes as a pretty, tempting idea that whispers, 'Disobey.' He finds his vessel. He finds a woman who has turned from her God-given place." Honor, sitting in the very back row, felt the heat rise on her neck. Every eye in the church was on her, or pointedly looking away from her. He finds a woman who thinks she knows better than the men who build this town. A woman who, through pride, through vanity, refuses her role and instead incites. She consorts with the heathen. She brings the shadow of the savage into our very homes. She leads good men to sin and brings the wrath of the righteous down upon us all. He was talking about her. He was calling her a harlot, a witch in the house of God. He was telling the town that the Apache raid, the trouble, the fire, it was all her fault. She had tempted the devil. Honor stood up. The rustle of her skirt was like a gunshot in the silence. She did not run. She did not look at Pike, or at the condemning face of the priest. She turned, her back straight, and walked down the aisle, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. She opened the heavy doors and stepped out into the blinding, honest sunlight. The sound of the door closing behind her was final. She was no longer just an outcast. She was a sinner, officially condemned. Sheriff Clegg wasted no time. He posted a new decree, nailed to the door of his office in the front of the saloon, by order of the territorial authority, which meant by order of Pike. No Apache was to be seen within 1 mile of the Agua de Cielo. It was now a military protection zone. It was a brilliant, cruel stroke. It cut off the sacred path. It gave Clegg's men, and Pike's new guns, the legal right to shoot any Apache on sight near the water. Nantan Kai knew it was a lie. He had found the wagon. He had read the signs in the dirt. The driver had not been scalped. He had been paid. Nantan had found his tracks, leading north to the railroad line, where a man with a full wallet had boarded the eastbound train. The supplies had not been stolen, just scattered to look violent. It was a stage play, and Pike was the director. He knew he could not fight, not with guns. To do so would be to walk into the trap, to bring the cavalry, to give Pike the very war he wanted. He needed a different weapon. He needed the truth. He found her not at the shack, but at the spring, writing in her book. Honor did not hear him approach. She was measuring the depth of the mud at the spring's edge with a marked stick. She looked up, startled, as his shadow fell over her. He knelt across the small pool from her. "They have forbidden me to be here," he said, his voice flat. "They have forbidden me from the church," she replied, her own voice brittle. "We are a pair of sinners, it seems." "You are measuring the water." It was a statement, not a question. "Yes, every morning, every evening. The level has dropped a 1/4 inch since they started building the foundation for the dam." She looked at her ledger, her neat black script filling the page. "And this, I am measuring the silt, the mud." She held up the stick, which was dark and wet at the bottom. "I was a fool. I thought I could show this in a town meeting, but they will not listen." "I will," he said. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She saw no pity. She saw only a still, deep attention. She took a breath. "My uncle was a farmer in the East, before he came here and lost his mind looking for silver. He taught me about streams. A stream is not just the water you see. It is the water under the ground. This mud," she gestured with the stick, "is wet for 3 feet down. It is the reserve. It is what keeps the roots alive when the sun is hottest." She pointed her pen at the men working on the dam, 50 yards away. "Their dam is not temporary. It is deep. They are digging a trench to put the wood down to the bedrock. When they do that, they will cut off the underground flow. The mud will dry in a month, the spring. This part will be a pool. But the pastures downstream, they will be dust by summer. The roots will die, just as you said." Nantan Kai nodded slowly. "You have seen the truth, and you have written it down." "Yes," she said, her voice bitter. "A book of truths that no one will read." "They will, but your book is not enough. They will say it is a woman's hysteria, the priest's words." "Then what is," she demanded, a flash of her old anger returning. A witness, someone from his own crew, someone who was paid to lie. And where do we find such a magical creature? That is my work, your work, he said, his gaze dropping to her ledger. Is to keep this safe. This is the seed. Do not let them burn it. He stood. I cannot come here again. It is too open. It is a trap for me and a danger for you. Then where? She asked, standing. If I find more, where? Do you know the Red Ledge? 2 miles north, where the rock folds over itself. The old Spanish lookout, yes. At the next full moon, 2 nights from now, after the town is asleep, bring your book, bring your truth. He turned to go. Wait, she said. The wagon, the driver, was it your people? He looked at her. No, it was a lie. The man who drove the wagon is now a rich man, far east of here. Pike paid for his ambush. How can you prove it? I cannot, not from the dirt. I need the man who paid him. He melted back into the rocks, leaving her with the sound of the hammers and the weight of a new, dangerous secret. For 2 days, Honor lived in a state of suspended fear. She held her classes, but the schoolhouse felt cold. Hatch and his men were always there, just outside, smoking, their presence a constant, silent threat. She stopped going into Las Moras for supplies. She made do with cornmeal and water. On the night of the full moon, she waited until she heard the saloon's last drunken song fade. She wrapped her ledger in an oilcloth, tied her bonnet on tight, and slipped out of her shack. She did not follow the path. She stayed in the shadows of the rocks, moving as he had taught her, without sound. The Red Ledge was a high, lonely place. The wind was louder up here. She scrambled up the last incline and found him waiting, a still silhouette against a sky full of stars. He was not looking at her. He was watching the valley below. You came, he said, without turning. I said I would. She unwrapped the ledger. Here, I have 2 more days of measurements. The water is already slower. He turned, but before he could take the book, another voice, oily and cruel, cut through the night. Well, now, look at this. Lewis Hatch stepped out from behind a tall pinnacle of rock, his rifle cradled in his arm. He was not alone. 2 of his men were with him, fanning out on either side. The priest was right. Hatch sneered, his eyes glittering in the moonlight, moving from Nantan to Honor. The heathen and the harlot, meeting on a hilltop. How romantic. What are you selling him? Teach her your body or just the town's secrets? Honor's blood went cold. This is a trap. No, ma'am, Hatch said, his voice full of false politeness. This is you being a fool. We followed you, easy as following a wounded deer. He gestured with his rifle at Nantan. And now we got him. Trespassing on the protection zone. Looks like we gotta shoot him. Boys, resisting arrest. Nantan Kai had not moved. He stood relaxed, his hands at his sides, his eyes on Hatch. You are Pike's dog, he said, his voice calm. But you are not Pike. You are just the mouth. He keeps his own hands clean. Clever savage, Hatch spat. Clever enough to die. He started to raise his rifle. He never got it level. Nantan moved. It was not a charge. It was a flow. He closed the 10 feet between them in a single, silent rush. Hatch, surprised, tried to swing the rifle like a club. Nantan was not there. He was inside the swing. His hand shot out, not in a fist, but with rigid fingers, striking Hatch just below the breastbone. Hatch's breath exploded from his body in a choked, wet gasp. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. As Hatch doubled over, clutching his chest, Nantan's other hand grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it. The bones grated. Hatch screamed, a high, thin sound, and the rifle clattered to the rocks. Nantan did not stop. He used Hatch's own momentum, spinning him around, his arm locked behind his back. The other 2 men, frozen for a second, fumbled with their own rifles. "Do not," Nantan said, his voice a low growl. He held Hatch in front of him like a shield, his forearm pressed against the man's throat. Or he breathed no more. Hatch was making terrible, gagging sounds, his face turning purple, his boots kicking uselessly at the rock. "Let him go," one of the men stammered, his rifle shaking. We will go." "Drop the rifles, kick them away," Nantan commanded. They looked at each other, then at their screaming boss, and did as he said. The rifles skidded across the ledge. Nantan held Hatch for a second longer, letting the man's terror peak. Then, with a grunt of contempt, he shoved him. Hatch fell to his knees, vomiting and choking, desperately dragging air back into his lungs. Nantan Kai turned his back on them. He walked calmly to Honor, who was pressed against the rock wall. The ledger clutched to her chest. "They will not touch you again," he said. It was not a threat. It was a promise. He looked at her, and his eyes were not the cold, distant eyes of a warrior. They were the eyes of a man. His gaze dropped, just for a second, to her shoulder, where the rough wool of her shawl was pushed aside. Then he looked up, meeting her eyes. "Give me the book. You must go, now, before they find their courage." Honor looked at him. She was not looking at his face. She was looking at his shoulder. In the moonlight, she could see it clearly, a puckered, pale scar, high on his left shoulder, just above the collarbone. It was round, old. "You were shot," she whispered, her hand rising, though she did not dare to touch him. That is a bullet from a soldier's rifle." Nantan's face hardened. He stepped back, his hand covering the scar by reflex. The moment of connection was broken. "It is an old debt," he said, his voice flat. But Honor had seen it, and he had seen her see it. He looked at her, this small, brave, foolish woman, who had come here alone, who had measured the mud, who had faced down the priest, and who now, after seeing him nearly kill a man, was looking at him with concern, not fear, concern. He realized his first assessment of her had been wrong. Her courage was not a single, hot flash, like the fire in her shack. It was a slow, steady burn. It was a thing he understood. "The town meeting," he said, his voice urgent, pulling them both back. "It is in 1 week. They will vote on Pike's Dam. Your book is not enough, and my word is nothing. We need one of his men." "A witness," Honor said, her mind racing, catching his. "Someone from the crew. But who would dare—" "There is a woman, a driller, Marla Boone. Pike fired her last week because she asked too many questions. I have been watching her. She is scared, but she is also angry. I will speak to her. You must be ready. If she will talk, we must get her to that meeting." "I will be ready," Honor said. He nodded, one sharp, final nod. "Go, down the south side. Stay in the shadows." She turned and fled, slipping down the rocks. She did not look back until she was 100 yards away. When she did, she could just see the ledge. Louis Hatch and his men were gone, having scrambled away, carrying their shame and their bruises. He was still there, a single, dark shape, standing small and alone against the vast, starry canvas of the sky. He looked, she thought, like a speck of dust, just as she was a speck of dust. Two small, human things, standing on a rock, daring to defy the great iron engine that was coming to crush their world. Nantan Kai moved in the spaces between the town, a shadow that belonged to the alleys and the dusk. He found Marla Boone not in her rented room, which would be watched, but in the lean-to behind the blacksmith's shop, where she had gone to collect her last few tools. She was a tall, rangy woman with knuckles that were permanently barked and eyes that held a burned-out, angry light. She was not a woman who scared easily, which was precisely why Pike had fired her. She saw him, and her hand went to the heavy rock hammer at her belt. I have no business with you, Apache. My name is Nantan Kai, he said, his voice quiet, not threatening. He did not approach too closely. You were the driller for Pike's Dam. You were the one who set the bedrock charges. I was, she said, her voice bitter. And I was the one who told him his design was wrong, that it would cut the aquifer. He said to mind my work and keep my mouth shut. I did not. He fired you for your honesty, Nantan said. He fired me, she corrected, because I saw the other ledger, the one his foreman keeps, not the official one, the one that lists the payoffs, the bribes, the security men. Nantan nodded slowly. That is the book I need. Marla let out a short, harsh laugh. What do you care about a book you want to scalp him? Go right ahead. I might even hold him for you. But I am not getting myself shot for a book. A book, Nantan said, stepping just out of the deepest shadow, is a white man's bullet. It kills from a long way off. It kills the name, not the man, and Pike fears that more than any arrow. He saw the flicker in her eyes. She was listening. He is building that dam to kill the valley, to sell the water back to the railroad, and to get your land, my land. The blueprints you drew, the real ones, and the book you saw, that is the proof. Give it to me. Give it to the teacher. Honor McCrae. She will use it at the town meeting. The worthless virgin, Marla sneered. But the insult was weak, automatic. You think they will listen to her? They will listen to the proof, he said. He hurt you. Marla Boone, he stole your job. He is stealing this valley. Help us, and we will help you. Help me how? By getting me a pine box. By getting you a train ticket east, with enough money to start over. After you speak at the meeting, we will see you safe. She stared at him for a long time, the hammer heavy in her hand. I do not have the book, not the real one, but I am a driller. I am good with numbers. I copied the pages. I have the damn blueprints, too, the ones he rejected, the ones that show the aquifer. Get them, Nantan said. Give them to Miss McCrae. She will be at the spring every day. She will be waiting. He left her there, and she did not call him back. Retaliation for the humiliation on the red ledge was not swift. It was mean, and it was personal. When Honor returned from her schoolhouse 2 days later, she found her home desecrated. Pike's men, almost certainly Hatch himself, had been there. They had not tried to burn it. Not this time. That was too quick. They had done something worse. They had taken her few belongings, her cot, her table, her mother's beads, and thrown them out into the dirt. They had kicked her small iron stove over, and they had taken a bucket of bright yellow paint, the same yellow as the survey stakes, and painted one word across the front of her shack, in huge, dripping, hateful letters. Worthless! Honor stopped, her books and her empty lunch pail dropping from her hand. It was not a word. It was a brand. It was everything the town whispered, everything Father Devereaux had shouted, now made manifest on her home. She felt a cold, sick shame rise in her, so profound she could not breathe. She stood there for a full minute, just staring at the word. Then, very slowly, she bent down. She picked up her books. She walked past the word and into her ruined home. She righted the stove. She went back out and began to gather her things. She found the string of her mother's beads, broken, scattered in the dust. She picked them up, one by one, her fingers shaking. She did not cry. The anger was too deep, too cold. She found her lye soap, her scrub brush, and her sharpest skinning knife, and she began to scrape. She worked for hours. The paint was new, and it was thick. It smeared under the lye, turning the word into a grotesque, wider stain before the knife could bite into the wood underneath. She scraped until her knuckles were raw and her fingernails were broken. She was removing the paint, but she was also removing the wood itself, leaving pale, raw gashes in the boards. Nantan Kai found her like that, her small figure perched on a stool, her arm aching, scraping with a furious, meticulous rhythm as the sun began to drop. He said nothing. He watched her for a moment, his eyes taking in the painted word, the raw scraped wood, the fury in the set of her shoulders. He turned and walked back toward the trees that lined the upper spring. He returned 20 minutes later, dragging 2 long, straight pine boughs, thick with green needles. The men had damaged her roof when they had climbed up to spill paint on it. He set the boughs down. "The wood is weak," he said. Honor stopped scraping, her arm dropping to her side, her hand clutching the knife. "It will hold," she said, her voice rough. "No," he said. He pointed with his chin at the roof. "They broke the main strut. It will fall in the next wind." He climbed up, silent as smoke, and began to pull away the rotted, broken shingles. He laid the pine boughs across the gap, lashing them to the good wood with strips of rawhide from his pouch. It was a temporary fix, but it was strong. It smelled of pine and resin, a clean smell that fought the stench of the yellow paint. When he dropped back to the ground, she was still standing there, covered in yellow flecks. "We have to stop him," she said, her voice a low, desperate hiss. "We have to show them this. We have to show them the book Marla has. Now, tomorrow." "No." His voice was iron. "What do you mean? No," she cried, her control finally breaking. She gestured at the wall with the knife. "He does this. He calls me this. He sends his men to my school. He is building the dam. And you say no." "I say no," he said, his voice calm but absolute, cutting through her panic. "This," he pointed at the word, "is a trap. This is paint. It is an insult. It means nothing to a judge. It is meant to make you scream, to make you run into the town and look like a hysterical woman. Just as the priest said, they want you to be angry. They do not want you to be smart." "And the book," she demanded. "Marla's book." "Marla Boone is scared. She will give you the copies. But if you show them before the meeting, Pike will say they are forgeries. He will have Clegg arrest you. He will have Hatch burn this shack to the ground with the book inside, and Marla Boone will disappear. Proof is not a thing you show. It is a thing you use, once, when it matters most. At the town meeting, not before." His logic was cold, and it was infuriating. And she knew he was right. It was a conflict between her raw, moral outrage and his cold, patient strategy. "He is killing the spring," she whispered, her fight gone, replaced by a dull ache. "I measure it. It is lower, every day." "Then we must work faster," he said. The sky, which had been a clear, aching blue, had changed. In the west, a brown wall was rising. A yellowish, sickly color was leaching into the air. The wind, which had been a breeze, suddenly gusted, kicking up dust and the yellow paint scrapings. Nantan's head snapped up. He tasted the air. "Get inside," he said. "Now." "What is it?" "Sandstorm. A bad one." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the shack. "Get your water." She had only a second to grab her canteen and the ledger book before the world vanished. It was not a wind. It was a wall. A solid, screaming wall of sand and grit that struck the shack with the force of a physical blow. The air turned dark yellow, then a suffocating, blind brown. The noise was a howl, a shriek that seemed to come from the earth itself. Honor screamed as a gust tore at the door, trying to rip it from her hands. Nantan was there, bracing his shoulder against it. "The spring!" he yelled over the roar. "The cave! This will not hold!" He did not wait for her answer. He wrapped one arm around her waist, tucked her head against his chest, and kicked the door open, pulling her out into the screaming, blind chaos. She could not see. She could not breathe. The grit was in her mouth, her eyes, her lungs. It was like being skinned alive. She clung to him as he moved, not toward the shack, but toward the spring, his body a shield against the worst of the wind. He knew this land as she knew the pages of her Bible. He found the opening by feel, a low cleft in the rock at the spring's head, hidden by brush. He half threw, half carried her inside, tumbling after her onto a sandy floor. The sound of the storm instantly muted, from a roar to a deafening, muffled whoom. Honor lay on the sand, coughing, trying to spit the mud from her mouth. She was shaking. "We are safe," he said. His voice was close in the dark. "It is a shell cave. Old water. It will pass." She sat up, wiping her streaming eyes. As her vision cleared, she saw he was right. They were in a small, dry cavern, no bigger than her shack. The walls were limestone, and in the dim light, she could see the perfect spiral shapes of ancient shells, fossils from a time when this desert had been a sea. The storm raged outside, a brown, angry curtain beyond the cave mouth. They were trapped, together. The silence in the cave was thick. It was broken only by the howl of the wind and their own breathing. "You were right," she said at last, her voice small. "About the roof, it would have been torn off." "It is only wood," he said. He sat a few feet from her, his back against the wall, watching the storm. "It is my home," she said quietly. "A home is not a box of wood. It is the place you stand." They were quiet again. The intimacy of the small space, of the shared danger, was more potent than any touch. "I had a home once," she said, surprising herself. "In the East, before my parents died of the fever. I was 8 years old. I lived in an orphanage for 10 years. They taught us to be quiet, to be grateful, and to be invisible." She looked at her hands. I am tired of being invisible." Nantan watched her. The brown light from the storm softened the lines of her face. "My brother was younger than me," he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear it. "When they moved us to the reservation, the one near San Carlos, the white piss sickness came, the dysentery, the doctor. He gave the soldiers medicine. He gave us nothing." He picked up a small, fossilized shell, turning it over in his fingers. "My brother was 6 years old. He died of thirst, crying for water, while we were camped on a river of it. The soldiers would not let us drink. They said we were being punished for leaving the camp." He closed his fist around the shell. "I have not been invisible since. It is a luxury I cannot afford." Honor stared at him, at the profile of his face, the hard line of his jaw. She saw the scar on his shoulder, and she understood the anger, the cold strategy, the reason he fought. He was not just fighting for a path. He was fighting the memory of that fever, of that thirst. She looked down at her own hand. It was stinging. In her haste, scraping the paint, she had driven a splinter of the raw wood deep into her palm. It was caked with dirt and yellow paint. Before she could hide it, he saw it. "You are hurt." He moved, not with the violence of the red ledge, but with a swift, quiet purpose. He sat in front of her. "Give me your hand." "It is nothing," she said, embarrassed. "It is poison," he said. "The paint. Give me your hand." She opened her palm. He took her hand in his. His grip was not rough, but it was absolute. His skin was warm and dry against her own, with the tip of his own knife, so sharp it looked like a sliver of glass. He flicked the splinter out before she could even wince. "This will sting," he said. He pulled a small pouch from his belt, shook some dried herbs into his palm, and mixed it with a few drops of water from his own canteen. He pressed the green, damp paste into the small wound. It did sting, a clean, sharp, burning sensation. He took a strip of clean cloth from his pouch and began to wrap her hand. His movements deft and sure. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was light. As he wrapped her wrist, his thumb brushed over a long, red scratch on her forearm. She had gotten it from the pine boughs he had brought. His thumb stopped. He traced the line of the scratch, from her wrist to her elbow. A single, slow, assessing touch. It was not a caress. It was a question. It was a tracing. Honor stopped breathing. The sound of the wind, the howl of the storm. It all faded. There was only the sound of her own blood, roaring in her ears, and the feeling of his skin against hers. His eyes, dark and unreadable, lifted to meet hers. He was so close. She could see the flecks of brown in his eyes, the faint lines at the corners. He saw her, the woman, not the teacher, not the virgin. The moment stretched, thick with a feeling that had no name. It was not just desire. It was respect. It was recognition. It was the dangerous, terrifying pull of two people who were truly, dangerously, alone. He held her gaze. Then, very slowly, he pulled his hand back. He finished tying the bandage with a quick, firm knot. "We must be careful," he said, his voice rough. He stood and moved back to his side of the cave, putting the space between them once more. The storm howled, and in the small, fossil-lined cave, Honor McCrae held her bandaged hand to her chest, her heart beating a new, wild and terrible rhythm. The storm passed by nightfall, leaving the world washed clean and raw. The next day, Honor found Marla Boone at the agreed-upon place, the dry wash behind the church. Marla looked as if she had not slept in a week. She was pale, her hands shaking. "You took too long," she whispered, her eyes darting around. "There was a sandstorm. Do you have them?" Marla nodded. She pushed a small, cloth-wrapped bundle into Honor's hands. "Copies. The blueprints are there, and the ledger pages. All I could remember. It is enough." It is damning." "Thank you. Marla, this is brave." "Brave," Marla laughed, a sound like a dry cough. "I am a fool. You promised me, Miss McCrae, after the meeting, safe passage." "I promise," Honor said, gripping her arm. "I will not let him hurt you." Honor was almost back to her shack, her heart a strange mix of terror and triumph. The small, precious bundle hidden in her market basket. She felt, for the first time, that they might win. Well, now, Miss McCrae, out for a walk. Sheriff Clegg stepped out from behind a rock, blocking her path. His badge was dull with dust. "Sheriff," she said, her heart lurching. "We have been looking for you," he said, his eyes on her basket. "Seems there has been a theft." He stepped aside, and behind him was Lewis Hatch, his arm in a sling, his face a mask of dark bruises. And between them, her arm gripped in Hatch's good hand, was Marla Boone. Marla's face was swollen, her lips split. "This woman," Clegg said, gesturing to Marla, "has been arrested for stealing vital documents from Mr. Pike's office, company property, and you have been seen talking to her." He snatched the basket from Honor's hand. He tore it open, dumping her few supplies onto the ground. He found the cloth-wrapped bundle. He ripped it open. It was just a small loaf of cornbread and a piece of cheese. Honor stared. It was not the package Marla had given her. "What is this?" Clegg growled. "My lunch," Honor said, her voice shaking, but not with fear, with confusion. Hatch growled and shoved Marla forward. "She is lying. They swapped." Clegg looked at the bread, then at Honor. He was confused. This was not what he expected. "Go on," he said to Honor, his voice dangerous. "Get and stay out of town business." Honor scrambled to pick up her things, not daring to look at Marla. She ran the last 100 yards to her shack. She burst inside, her heart pounding, and there, on her cot, was the real bundle, the one with the blueprints. She had been so nervous. She had picked up the wrong package. She had left her lunch. And Marla, in her terror, had given her the real proof. It had been a mistake, an accident. Honor sank onto the cot, her hands shaking as she opened the package. Blueprints, and pages of neat columns and names. Clegg, $10. Devereaux, $20. Hatch, $50. She had the proof, but Marla, the only one who could swear to it, was in Clegg's jail. That night, as she hid the papers beneath a loose floorboard, she heard it, a new sound, a long, mournful, triumphant whistle from the east, the railroad. She ran to the spring. The first section of the dam, a raw wall of new pine, was finished. It cut across the head of the spring, choking the flow. The water level was already visibly lower. The pool that had been a yard wide was now a foot, and in the shallow, muddy water, a small, silverfish flopped once, fighting for breath, and then turned, its white belly gleaming in the moonlight. The risk was no longer a threat. It was here. Zebediah Pike was a man who understood the value of theater. The dam was built, the water was low, and the dead fish, though quickly removed, had been an unfortunate piece of public relations. He needed to change the story. He did not issue a correction. He threw a party. He called it the Community Prosperity Picnic, and he held it in the dusty square right in front of Father Devereaux's church. It was a performance of magnificent generosity. He had a wagon of tinned peaches brought in from the east, a delicacy so rare it was spoken of in whispers. He distributed sacks of new milled flour. He announced, to stunned applause, a 10% discount on all rail tickets, good for 1 month. He was not just a businessman, he was a benefactor. The centerpiece of his performance was the 4 parentless children who lived in the church's damp basement. He had them brought onto the platform, their faces scrubbed, their hair slicked down. He gave each child his own tin of peaches and patted their heads as if they were his own. Father Devereaux, his face glowing with a holy, reflected light, raised his hands over the crowd. "Behold," he boomed, his voice carrying in the dry air, "a man who does the work of the Lord, while others sow dissent and chaos. Zebediah Pike builds our future. He feeds the hungry. He remembers the orphan. This." He gestured to Pike, who lowered his head in perfect, false humility. "Is a righteous man." The town, their mouths full of free peaches and their minds full of cheap tickets, cheered. They were bought, body and soul, for the price of canned fruit. While the cheers were still ringing, the flyers appeared. They were tacked to the saloon door, the wall of the general store, and the heavy oak doors of the church itself. The ink was still damp. "Apache Sabotage," the headline screamed in thick black letters. The text below was simple, brutal, and effective. It claimed that a band of renegade Apache, angered by the town's progress, had been seen fouling the agua de cielo. They had thrown animal carcasses into the stream, it said, in an attempt to poison the good people of Las Moras. The dam, the flyer explained, was the only thing protecting the town's water supply. It did not stop there. It ended with a warning. Citizens are advised to avoid the schoolteacher, Honor McCrae, a known agitator and Indian sympathizer. Her reckless and inflammatory words are believed to have incite-ed this heathen violence. The logic was complete. The water was not low because of the dam. It was dirty because of the Apache. Honor was not a neighbor. She was an agitator. The word was as ugly and foreign as the yellow paint, and it served the same purpose to make her less than human, a thing to be driven out. Nantan Kai did not read the flyers. He read the earth. He knew this lie was a precursor to a larger one. Pike would need a body soon, a piece of irrefutable, bloody proof. He went to find Thomas Redbird. Thomas was his blood brother, a man whose lightness balanced Nantan's gravity. Where Nantan was a shadow, Thomas was a lizard, all quick movement and sharp, observant eyes. He had lived for 3 years among the white men, and he understood their specific brand of treachery. "He says we poisoned the water," Nantan said. They stood in the high chaparral, looking down on the raw pine scar of the new dam. "It is a weak lie. It will not hold. He will need a stronger one, a louder one. He will need fire." Tomas agreed, his eyes on the dam. "I will look." Tomas moved in the daylight, a place Nantan could no longer go. He approached the dam from the high rocks, not from the trail, and he spent 2 hours watching the new guards hatch his men from a high, hot perch. He watched them smoke. He watched them drink. He saw where they stored their excess supplies. Under a pile of discarded lumber, tucked beneath a waterproof oilcloth, he found what he was looking for. It was not a large stash of dynamite. It was something smaller, more precise. A box of detonator caps and 3 sticks of blasting powder, wired together with a crude but effective fuse. Thomas knew, instantly, what it was. It was not a weapon to destroy the dam. It was a prop. It was Pike's next move. He would set this small charge himself, damage his own work, and then he would discover this evidence. He would show the town the Apache-made explosive. It would be the final, perfect excuse to call in the cavalry. It was a trap, not for the water, but for Nantan's people. Tomas took one of the detonator caps, a small, cold piece of brass. He slipped it into his pouch and disappeared back into the rocks, leaving the trap waiting for its master. With the town meeting only days away, honor was now a problem that Pike had to solve. She was the last loose thread. Lewis Hatch, his arm now out of the sling but his shoulder still a knot of purple bruises, decided to solve the problem his own way. He waited for her on the trail from her schoolhouse. It was dusk, the mountains bleeding the last of the sun, and the world was sinking into a deep, purple shadow. He had 2 men with him. They did not hide. They simply stepped out of the brush, blocking her path. Evening, agitator. Hatch sneered. His voice was a low, ugly drawl. "Mister, Pike is tired of your noise. He wants a word. In private." "I am not going with you. Honor said—" She backed away, her small pile of books held like a shield. "I do not think you were asked," Hatch said. He lunged, his good hand grabbing her arm, his fingers digging in. He was strong, but he was loud. He did not hear the sound of the high, thin arrow that cut the air until it thunked into the hard-packed earth. Inches from his boot, it was a black-fletched warning. Hatch spun, dragging Honor with him, his hand flying to his pistol. "Apache, it is an ambush, damn her. She brought them—" Thomas Redbird dropped from the low-hanging branch of a scrub oak, landing as silently as a cat on the back of one of the men. The man's rifle went off, a deafening blast that went nowhere. As Thomas's knife found the man's throat, he did not kill. He just held the blade against the skin. A cold promise. The man froze, dropping his rifle. Nantan Kai emerged from the rocks, his face a mask of cold fury. Hatch was enraged. He saw his humiliation on the red ledge happening all over again. He shoved Honor to the ground and raised his pistol, not at Nantan, but at the closer, more immediate threat. He fired at Thomas. Tomas twisted, pulling the man he held as a shield. The bullet, aimed badly, missed the man and tore a hot, searing line across Thomas's forearm. Tomas grunted, a sharp sound of pain, and shoved the man away, disappearing back into the brush, his arm clamped tight. Hatch fired again, wildly, into the shadows. Nantan used the moment. He moved through the gun smoke, closing the distance. He did not go for the gun. He went for the man. He struck Hatch's gun hand, a hard, sharp blow with the edge of his palm. Bones cracked. The pistol flew into the darkness. Hatch screamed, a sound of pure agony. Nantan shoved him back, hard, sending him sprawling over a rock. "Get her!" Hatch shrieked, clutching his broken hand. "Get the teacher!" But the last man was already running, crashing through the brush, terrified of the arrows and the shadows. Hatch scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of sweat and hatred. "This is not over, you savage! This is not over, you worthless whore!" He backed away, clutching his ruined hand. And then he, too, turned and ran. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by Honor's ragged breathing. Nantan was at her side in an instant, his hands pulling her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "No," she gasped. No, I am not! Thomas stepped out, his face pale and tight, his left hand clamped over his right forearm. Blood, dark in the twilight, was seeping between his fingers. Thomas, Nantan said. His voice was flat, but Honor could feel the cold, terrible anger beneath it. This was no longer just about water. Blood had been spilled, his brother's blood. They took Thomas to the fossil cave. Honor, her hands shaking, tore a long strip from the hem of her petticoat and bound his arm. The wound was a long, ugly graze, but the bullet had passed through the muscle. "He owes me," Thomas said, his voice tight as she pulled the cloth tight. "He owes us all," Nantan said. He looked at Honor, his gaze hard. "You are not safe. Not at the shack, not at the school, not anywhere." "The meeting," Honor said, her voice finding its strength. "It is in 3 days, Sunday. It is the only way. We have to finish this." "We have the book," Nantan agreed, his mind working. "We have the blueprints. Thomas has the detonator cap, but we do not have the voice. We need Marla Boone." The news came the next morning. Silas, the rancher, rode out to her shack at dawn, his eyes wide. "They let her go," he whispered, twisting his hat in his hands. "Clegg just let Marla Boone go, said he had no proof she stole anything. Pike himself was at the jail. He just laughed. He told Clegg he would not press charges against a troubled woman. He is arrogant, ma'am. He thinks he has already won." Nantan found Marla in her small, rented room. She was throwing her few belongings into a carpet bag. She was going to run. "He let me go because I am no threat," she said, her voice dead, her back to him. "I am just a crazy woman. No one will listen to me." "I will listen," Honor said. She stepped into the room behind Nantan. "We will listen, and they." She pointed toward the county hall. "We'll listen, on Sunday, at the meeting." Marla turned. She looked at the teacher and the Apache. You said you would get me safe passage." "We will," Nantan said. "After you speak." Marla looked at her bag, then at the door. She took a long, slow breath. The first real breath she had taken in a week. "One time, I will speak one time, and I will tell the truth. Then, you get me out of this valley, or I swear, I will take you both down with me." The alliance was set. Honor, the agitator, Nantan, the savage, Marla, the troubled woman. They were the only justice the valley had. Honor held her class one last time before the meeting. She did not use the schoolhouse. That was Hatch's territory now. She took her 7 children to the spring. They saw the change. The water was no longer a spring. It was a sick, shallow puddle, choked by the new dam. The water was stagnant, a greenish brown. The birds were gone. "Is the water sleeping, Miss McCrae?" little Silas asked, his voice small. "It is," Honor said, her voice soft. "And we have to wake it up." She taught them a small, simple song her mother had taught her. A rhyme about the rain. Rain fall down, spring come up, fill the cup, fill the cup. Their voices were thin in the dry, hot air. As they sang, Honor had them gather the white, sun-bleached stones from the dry part of the stream bed. "We will make a word," she said, "to remind the water where it belongs." They laid the stones out, one by one, on the baked, cracked mud. It was a small, childish, defiant gesture, a prayer made of rocks, 4 letters, H-O-M-E. The town did not know it, but the pieces were already moving. On Saturday, Sheriff Clegg, in the quiet of his office, signed a new county order. It gave him the legal authority to disperse any unlawful assembly that threatened the peace or property of Las Moras. It was a blank check for violence. Lewis Hatch did not trust in paperwork. That night, he was seen carrying 5-gallon cans of kerosene from the general store. He was not pouring it on the county hall. He was more subtle. He was soaking the dry brush around the hall, in the back alley, in the woodpile. If the meeting went badly, a stray match, a terrible accident, would solve the problem for good. Sunday afternoon, the sun was a hammer. The air was dry, and the valley felt like it was holding its breath. At 1 o'clock, the church bell began to ring. It was not a call to prayer. It was the bell for the county meeting. From their small, thirsty ranches, the farmers came, their face pinched with worry. From the saloons, Pike's hired men came, confident and laughing. From his new office, Zebediah Pike came, his arms full of official-looking papers. Honor McCrae walked from her shack. The ledger pages and the blueprints were wrapped in cloth, hidden in her basket. Nantan and Thomas were not with her. They were already in the high rocks, watching. Marla Boone, her face pale but her eyes burning with a cold fire, slipped out of her room and walked toward the hall. The crowd gathered. They filed into the hot, stuffy county hall, the only building large enough to hold them. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and something else, a faint, oily smell that no one could quite place. Pike and Clegg and Father Devereaux took their seats on the stage. Honor and Marla took seats in the front row. The two sides of the valley, the iron and the water, were in the same room. The bell stopped ringing. The heavy doors were closed. The meeting began. Zebediah Pike stood on the stage of the county hall, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice thick with a landlord's concern. He spoke of prosperity, of the future, of the tinned peaches. He explained that the dam, a magnificent feat of private engineering, was a gift. It was, he said, the only thing that would save them from the unfortunate situation at the spring, a situation he implied was caused by forces beyond his control. "We must vote," he concluded, his smile spreading over the hot, packed room. "To make the dam permanent, to secure our water, to secure our future for our children." Honor McCrae stood up. The scrape of her small stool was deafening in the silence that followed his speech. Every eye in the room, over 50 people, turned to her. Pike's smile faltered. Sheriff Clegg, sitting near the stage, put his hand on his pistol. "You are a liar, Mr. Pike." Honor said. Her voice did not boom, like the priest's. It was not slick, like Pike's. It was a teacher's voice, clear and cold and precise, and it cut through the heat. "Miss McCrae, you are out of order," Father Devereaux called from the side. "I am in order," Honor said, walking to the front. "You are a liar. You are not securing our water. You are stealing it, and I am not an agitator. I am a witness." She turned to the crowd. "We have all been fools. We have been listening to the man who holds the matches, telling us he is the only one who can put out the fire." She turned to the front row. "Marla, will you come?" Marla Boone, her face pale but her eyes blazing, stood. She, too, walked to the front, and in her hand, she held a rolled-up set of papers. She was shaking, but she did not falter. "My name is Marla Boone," she said, her voice the rough, practical voice of a worker. "I was Mr. Pike's head driller. He fired me. He did not fire me for bad work. He fired me because I am good at my work. He fired me because I told him the truth." She unrolled the blueprints on the stage, at Pike's feet. "These are the plans he gave the county. They are very pretty, and they are a lie. And these—" She pulled a second, more detailed set from her pocket. "Are the real ones, the ones he had me draw, the ones he told me to burn." She pointed. "This is not a dam to measure flow. Look, this trench, here, it goes to bedrock. I know, I drilled the holes. It is designed to do one thing, to cut the aquifer, to kill the underground river. He is not saving the spring. He is murdering it, so he can sell the railroad the rights to the next spring, 10 miles up his private line." A deep, angry murmur started in the back. Silas, the rancher, stood up. He would not, would he? He would. Honor said. She reached into her basket and pulled out the small, cloth-wrapped bundle, but she did not open it. Instead, she reached into the bodice of her dress, her hand disappearing for a moment. She pulled out the folded ledger pages. She had never let them leave her body. He did, she said. She held up the first page. This is a copy of his foreman's private ledger, the real one. Pike, for the first time, looked afraid. His face went from red to a pasty, sick white. This is a forgery. This is slander, Sheriff. Arrest this woman. In a moment. Sheriff, Honor said, her voice ringing. Let us see who should be arrested. A payment, on the 4th of last month, to Sheriff Clegg. $10 for security services. Clegg half rose from his chair, his face purple. That is a lie. On the 5th, Honor continued, her voice rising, to Father Devereaux, $20 for the Orphans' Charity Fund. Blasphemy, the priest choked. And on the 10th, Honor's voice was a blade now, a transfer from Zebediah Pike to Lewis Hatch, $50 for special services. She looked right at Pike. What special services did you buy? Mr. Pike, a burned shack, a false ambush, or was it for a small, brass detonator cap? As the name left her lips, the world exploded. Louis Hatch, who had been crouched in the alley behind the hall, his face a mask of rage, lit the fuse. He had not waited. The mention of his name was enough. The explosion was not a bomb. It was a concussive, roaring whump as the back wall of the hall, where Hatch had piled the kerosene-soaked brush, erupted it in a solid sheet of orange flame. The dry wood of the hall, baked by the sun, caught instantly. The crowd screamed as one, a wave of pure, animal panic. They surged for the front doors, a solid, trampling mass of bodies. The exits were jammed in a second. Zebediah Pike was the first one through, shoving old Mrs. Gable to the floor in his haste. Clegg was right behind him. Smoke, thick and black, filled the room. From the high rocks, Nantan and Thomas saw the orange blossom of the fire, heard the muffled roar. Nantan was moving before the smoke had cleared the roof. He ran, not to the front, but to the back, to the alley. He saw the fire-eaten hole where the wall had been. Nantan, the bars! Thomas yelled, gesturing to the small, barred windows. Nantan did not pause. He grabbed the frame of the nearest window, his muscles bunching, and with a roar, he ripped the entire thing, wood and adobe and iron, from the wall. Out this way, he bellowed into the chaos. Inside, Honor was on the floor, knocked down by the surge. She was choking, the smoke a solid, burning thing in her lungs. She looked up, and through the haze, she saw Marla. She was trapped, a heavy ceiling beam, shaken loose by the blast, had fallen, pinning her leg. The fire was licking at the stage, not 10 feet from her. Honor crawled, her eyes streaming. Marla. She reached her, grabbing her arms. Pull! Marla screamed, her face white with pain. It is my leg, I am stuck. Honor tried to lift the beam. It was solid oak. It would not budge. Help! She shrieked, her voice lost in the roar. A shadow moved through the fire. Nantan Kai was there. He did not look at the flames. He looked at Marla. He jammed his shoulder under the beam and heaved. The vein in his neck stood out. The beam lifted 6 inches. Now, he grunted. Honor grabbed Marla by the shoulders and dragged her, free and sobbing, from under the wood. Go, Nantan ordered, shoving Marla toward the broken window. Go to Thomas. He is there. Marla scrambled, half crawling, and disappeared through the opening. Nantan turned back for Honor. She was on her knees, trying to stand, but the smoke had taken her. She collapsed in a fit of coughing, her body slumping. He saw her go down. The fire was everywhere, the heat a physical blow. He did not hesitate. He ripped his own heavy wool jacket from his shoulders. He lunged, scooping her up from the floor, wrapping the jacket around her head and body, shielding her, and then he dove through the broken window, rolling with her into the alley. Just as the main roof of the hall collapsed inward with a sound like a giant, dying breath. He set her down, leaning against the cool adobe of the general store. Far from the flames, the air was fresh, but it was not dry. A slow, cold drizzle had begun to fall. The sky, which had refused the valley for months, was finally weeping. The rain hissed on the burning timbers. Honor was on her hands and knees, coughing up the blackness, gasping for air. Her face was a mask of soot, her hair singed. Nantan knelt in front of her, his bare shoulders gleaming in the wet, his chest heaving. He was breathing, not from the run, but from a terror so profound it had shaken his bones. He had almost lost her. His hand, which had just ripped a wall apart, was shaking. He reached out, his fingers, rough as granite, calloused from the bow and the knife, touched her face. They called her worthless virgin, but his fingers traced her as if she were a sacred thing, as if she were his heaven. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb gently, so gently, wiping the soot from her cheekbone. His touch was not a claim. It was a question. It was a prayer. He needed to know she was real, that she was alive beneath the ash. His hand moved down to the pulse point on her neck, and then to her wrist, his fingers wrapping around it, feeling the small, fast, frantic beat of her life against his palm. Their eyes met. In the middle of the chaos, with the shouting of the town and the hiss of the rain and the crackle of the fire, the world went silent. There was only the sound of her breathing, and his. He saw her, the woman who had measured the mud, the woman who had not been afraid. She stopped coughing. She leaned into his touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and then she did a thing that shattered his last defense. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was not a kiss, it was more. It was a gesture of absolute, terrifying trust. It was a commitment, a promise. In that moment, he chose her, and she, in that moment, chose him. Forever. The spell was broken by Thomas, who landed at his side, his arm bandaged, his eyes grim. "The hall is gone. Pike is screaming. He is blaming you, blaming her. The papers." "I have them," Honor whispered. Her voice was a raw croak. She reached into her bodice, her hand closing on the oilcloth-wrapped papers. Still safe. Still there. "They will hunt you now," Nantan said, his voice flat and hard. He stood, pulling her to her feet, his hand still on her arm, unwilling to let her go. From across the square, Pike's voice rose above the din. "Find them. Find the agitators. She did this. She and her savage lover, they burned it down. $100. $100 for Honor McCrae." Clegg, his badge catching the firelight, drew his gun. "You heard him. We got an arsonist. We got a murderer. Find her." "You must hide," Nantan said, pulling her deeper into the shadows of the alley. "Come with me, to the high camp. I will keep you safe." Honor looked at him. She looked at the burning ruin of the hall, at the mob forming in the square. She took a breath, and though it hurt, her voice was firm. "No, I will not hide. Not anymore. The truth cannot hide. It needs to see the sun. We must go to Tucson, to the federal marshals." A figure emerged from the rain, an old woman, her face a map of the valley, her eyes as dark and old as the spring. It was Naada, one of the Apache elders. She had been watching. She walked straight to Honor. She looked her up and down, a long, deep, assessing gaze. Then she nodded, once, as if a question had been answered. The old woman untied a strip of cloth from her own waist. It was a worn, dark blue length of wool, dyed with indigo. She pressed it into Honor's hand. "A go," she said. "The sky. You wear this. You are a guest under our sky." It was a blessing, a protection, a sign of acceptance. Nantan looked at the cloth, then at Honor. He nodded, his face hard with a new, terrible resolve. The decision was made. "Tucson," he said. "Tomas, you know the plan. Take the men north, draw hatch. Make him think you have her. I want him to taste the rocks." Tomas grinned, a grim, wolfish expression. "With pleasure, brother. Marla will ride with you. Honor, she knows the South Pass." "And you?" Honor asked, her hand closing tight on the indigo cloth. "I go back," he said. "To the mountains. I will gather the elders, the witnesses to the old path. Your book is not enough. We need the memory of the people. We will meet the marshals with the law, and with the land itself." He looked at her, and the promise he had made with his touch, he now made with his words. "The stone bridge, 3 days from now, before the sun rises." 3 days, she whispered. He touched her bandaged hand. One last, brief, hard grip, a promise of life. Then he and Tomas were gone, fading into the rain, shadows among shadows. Honor tied the blue cloth around her arm. She turned to Marla, who had come up beside her, her face grim. 2 women, with the truth wrapped in oilcloth, against a whole town that wanted them dead. "Let us go," Honor said, and she turned her back on the burning town, facing the long, dark road south. The Llano Estacado was not a valley. It was a table, set by a cruel and minimalist god, a flat, endless expanse of rock and baked red dirt. It offered no quarter, no shadow, and no place to hide. Honor McCrae and Marla Boone were a dark, frantic speck moving across its surface. They had stolen a small buckboard and 2 mean, stringy horses from Pike's own livery. It was a small, bitter piece of irony that gave Honor no comfort. For 2 days, they had pushed south. Behind them, always, was the dust. "He is still there," Marla said, her voice a dry croak. She did not need to look. She could feel him. Lewis Hatch was not a hunter. He was a bloodhound. He did not care about the heat or his broken hand, which he had tied in a sling of dirty cloth. He only cared about the chase. He had 4 men with him, and they were gaining. "They are fresher than our horses," Honor said, her eyes fixed on the gray-brown horizon. "We cannot outrun them." "Then we have to outthink them," Marla said, her eyes scanning the landscape. "We need a miracle." The miracle, when it came from the north. As dusk fell on the 2nd day, a new light appeared on the northern ridge, miles behind Hatch's party. It was not a star, it was a fire, a big one. It flared up, a sudden, impossible bloom of orange against the purple sky. "Tomas," Honor whispered, her hand clutching the seat of the buckboard. "He did it," Marla breathed. "He lit the whole damn canyon." They watched as the dust cloud behind them, the one that was Louis Hatch, stopped. The men conferred. Then, the dust cloud split. 3 of the riders wheeled their horses around, racing back north toward the massive, distracting blaze. "He did it," Marla said again, a grim triumph in her voice. "He pulled them." But 2 riders remained. They did not turn. They kept coming, slower, but steady. "He left himself too," Honor said, her heart sinking. "Hatch is one of them. He did not take the bait, not all of it." The sky, which had been clear, was changing. The air, which had been dry and hot, became thick, wet, and heavy. It was a strange, greenish-black, and it carried the sharp, clean smell of ozone. "Oh, Lord," Marla whispered, looking up. "Not this, not now." A lightning storm, as they called it, was not a rainstorm. It was a dry, electric war waged by the sky. The first bolt struck 5 miles to the west, a silent, jagged crack of white. The second was closer, hitting a tall saguaro cactus, which exploded in a brief, violent torch of green fire. The horses screamed. They were terrified. Their eyes rolling white, they fought the reins, trying to bolt. "Hold them!" Honor yelled, but it was too late. The third bolt struck the ground not 50 yards from the wagon. The world turned white. The air cracked with a sound so loud it was a physical blow, and the ground shook. One of the horses reared, its legs snapping the traces, and the other lunged, pulling the buckboard at a violent, impossible angle. Honor heard the sound, a sharp, wooden crack that was not the thunder. The wagon lurched, the right side dropping, and the wheel, its axle shattered by the jolt, spun away into the darkness. They were thrown clear, tumbling into the sharp rocks and cactus as the wagon collapsed. The storm was on them. The lightning was not occasional. It was a constant, flickering strobe, turning the night into a terrifying, blue-white day. The rain, when it came, was not a blessing. It was a horizontal, driving force of ice-cold water. "Under here!" Marla yelled, her voice torn by the wind. She had found a shallow overhang, a place where the rock had been hollowed out by ancient water. It was not a cave, it was a scoop, a shallow wound in the rock, offering almost no shelter. They pressed themselves against the back of it, as the storm tried to peel them from the earth. They shivered, drenched to the bone. For 2 hours, the horses were gone, the wagon was a wreck. They were stranded, 40 miles from the nearest sign of life, with a killer on their trail. When the storm finally passed, it left the air cold and brutally clean. The moon, a cold chip of light, appeared. "He is still out there," Marla said, her voice chattering. "The storm would have sent him to ground, just like us. He will find the wagon tracks come morning, and he will find us." She reached into her own shirt. She pulled out a small, silver locket, the kind a girl in the East might wear. It was attached to a simple chain. "I did not tell you," she said, her voice low. "I was afraid. The copies I gave you, the paper ones, they are good, but I made another set. A man I know in Tucson, he does this for the railroad. Tiny pictures. He put them on a piece of film, like for a camera. They are all here. The ledger, the blueprints, everything." She pressed the cold, wet locket into Honor's hand. "This is the real proof. Honor, the kind a judge cannot deny." Honor stared at the locket, then at Marla. "Why, Marla, why?" "Because he is hunting you," Marla said, her face grim in the moonlight. "He wants the agitator. He only wants me because I am with you. But if I am not with you—" She stood up, her body a dark, strong silhouette against the wet rocks. "There was one horse," she said, pointing. "The lead horse, the one that had broken the trace, was standing 100 yards away, trembling, its trace lines tangled in a mesquite bush. I am going to take him. I am going to ride east, toward the rail line. He will see my tracks. He will think it is both of us. He will follow me. It buys you a day, maybe 2. "No," Honor said, scrambling to her feet. "Marla, you cannot. That is suicide." "It is a choice," Marla said, her voice hard. "It is the first real choice I have made in a year. You get to the stone bridge. You give that locket to your Apache. You finish this." She did not wait for an argument. She walked out, her boots slipping on the wet rocks, and began the slow, patient work of calming the terrified horse. Honor watched her. She watched her mount. She watched her ride. Not south, but east. A lone, brave, doomed figure, disappearing into the cold, clean dark. In Las Moras, the lie was already being set in stone. Sheriff Clegg had Thomas Redbird in his jail. The diversion had been a success, pulling 3 of Hatch's men, but it had also been a trap. Clegg had been waiting. Tomas sat in a chair in the center of the jail office, his hands bound. His face was a map of new bruises. His bandaged arm was bleeding again. A reporter from the Tucson paper, a thin, nervous man with ink stains on his fingers, was scribbling. "And he confessed?" the reporter asked, his eyes wide. "Right here," Clegg said, gesturing to a piece of paper, which contained nothing but Thomas's bloody thumbprint, forced onto the page. The savage confessed it all. His words, written right here. Clegg cleared his throat and began to read the confession he had written himself. He said, Clegg announced that the Apache Nation was angry, that the teacher, Honor McCrae, had promised them guns and whiskey, that they had set the fire to cleanse the town, and that they had planned to kill Mr. Pike. It is all here, a full confession. The reporter scribbled faster. The lie was now history. The town, which had been confused, was now terrified, and it was united in its fear against a common enemy. Nantan Kai did not know about the confession. He did not know about the storm. He only knew his path. He walked. He was not alone. Naada, the elder, walked just behind him. Her feet, in their worn moccasins, made no sound. Beside her walked an old man, the keeper of the stories, his eyes nearly blind, but seeing more than any of them. Two women, the ones who had carried the water, walked as well, their empty pots a silent testament to the stolen spring. And with them, walking stiffly, his eyes fixed on the ground, was a white man. His name was Jonah. He had been a cavalry private, a young boy from Ohio who had come west to see the world, and had seen hell instead. He had been at San Carlos. He had been the one who had held his canteen back, under orders, from Nantan's dying brother. He had never forgiven himself. He had found Nantan a week ago, a ghost in the Las Moras saloon, and had offered his life. Nantan had refused. He had asked, instead, for his memory. "He will tell them," Nantan had said, "that the path was here, that the army knew, that Pike paid them to forget the boundary." Nantan himself carried the map. It was not paper. It was a tanned deer hide, old and supple, marked not with ink, but with porcupine quills and ash. It showed the valley. It showed the spring. And it showed the path, a sacred line that had been there since the before time. They were not just witnesses. They were the living land, walking to meet the written law. On the third night, Honor was on her last ounce of strength. She had walked for a full day and a night, guided by the stars, her body aching, her heart a cold stone of grief for Marla. She saw the stone bridge. It was a high, natural arch of red rock, a perfect, impossible span across a deep canyon. At the bottom, a small, sluggish stream, fed by some hidden spring, trickled over the rocks. She had made it. Her promise was kept. She staggered to the center of the bridge, the highest point, and looked north, praying for the sight of him. "You are a hard woman to find, teacher." The voice was not Nantan's. Louis Hatch stepped out from the shadows at the far end of the bridge. He was alone. His horse was behind him. His face was a mask of cold, triumphant rage. "Marla," Honor whispered. "The driller," Hatch sneered. "She was a nice distraction. Took my man east for a whole day. But I am not stupid. I knew you would not be with her. I knew you had a promise to keep." He gestured to the canyon. "I have been waiting for you, agitator." He advanced on her, his broken hand held against his chest, his good hand resting on his pistol. "The fire, the lies, it all ends here. Pike wants you, and I want what you stole." He grabbed her, his fingers biting into her arm. He shook her. "Where are the papers? Who are the ones you read in the hall? Give them to me." Honor's mind was a blaze of terror, and beneath it, a sliver of cold, clear ice. Nantan was coming. She had to protect the proof, and she had to buy him time. She let her body go limp, a picture of despair. Her hand fumbled at her neck. She pulled the locket out. It glinted, silver, in the moonlight. "You want them?" she said, her voice a broken sob. "Is this what you want?" Hatch's eyes fixed on the locket. He knew. "The driller's trinket. Give it to me." He reached for it. "No!" Honor shrieked, in a last, perfect performance of defiance. "You will not have it, you will not win." With all her strength, she ripped the locket from her neck and threw it, a high silver arch, off the side of the bridge. They both watched it fall. It spun, glittering, down, 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 into the blackness of the canyon. A tiny splash echoed up, 100 feet below. It was gone. Hatch stared, frozen, for one full second. His face, a mask of rage, of disbelief, of pure, thwarted hatred. Turned to her. He struck her, a backhanded blow that sent her sprawling to the stone. "You stupid fool!" he roared. The proof was gone. The only evidence, destroyed. He stood over her, breathing like a winded bull. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. A cold, ugly sound. "Well," he spat, "it does not matter. The proof is gone, and the witness—" He hauled her to her feet, pulling her hands behind her back, tying them with a rawhide thong. "The witness is all mine." He dragged her to his horse. He had a small prison wagon, a cage on wheels, hidden in the trees. He threw her into it and locked the door. "You will be at the end of a rope by noon." He growled. "Pike will be very happy to see the arsonist who destroyed his proof." He was satisfied. He had his captive. The case was closed. He sat by his small fire, his pistol in his lap, waiting for the dawn. He would deliver his prize to Pike in Las Moras, a hero. He did not see the figures on the high canyon rim. He did not see Nantan Kai, his face a carved piece of stone, as he watched the man who had struck his woman. Nantan looked at the small, caged wagon. He looked at Honor, a dark shape, huddled inside. And then he looked at the eastern sky, where the first cold gray line of morning was breaking the dark. The time for hiding was over. The rescue was about to begin. The new sun was a blade of cold fire, cutting the gray line of the horizon. It lit the thin column of smoke from Louis Hatch's fire, and it struck the man himself as he drank from a tin cup, his pistol in his lap, his prisoner secure. From the high rim of the canyon, Nantan Kai saw the light. He held a small, polished piece of obsidian, a stone of his ancestors, a thing that held its own fire. He did not aim the light at Hatch. He aimed it at the shadows, 200 yards away, where his own horse and Hatch's team were tethered. He angled the stone, a single, sharp, blinding flash, aimed at the eyes of the lead horse. The horse screamed. It was not a sound of fear, but of sharp, sudden, alien panic. It reared, its eyes white, its harness creaking. The other horses caught the terror. They lunged, fighting the tethers, fighting the weight of the wagon. Hatch was on his feet in an instant, his pistol up. "Who is there?" he roared. He never saw Nantan. He only saw his own transportation, his only way out, tear itself free. The tether pin, weakened by Nantan's knife in the dark, snapped. The horses bolted, dragging the heavy prison wagon with them. The wagon was not built for speed. It slammed into a line of boulders Nantan had chosen. The front axle shattered. The wagon did not crash. It gave a great, wounded lurch, tipping onto its side with a groan of splintering wood. The cage was on its side. The door jammed against the earth. Hatch fired his pistol, wildly, at the horses, at the canyon, at the sky. "Show yourself, damn you!" "I am here." Nantan was not on the ridge. He was standing 10 feet behind Hatch, a silent shadow in the new dawn. Hatch spun, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He fired, but he was firing at the space where Nantan had been. Nantan was inside the shot, moving low. His hand struck Hatch's wrist, a hard, numbing blow. The pistol flew, skittering across the rocks. Hatch, his good hand now useless, lunged, pulling a long skinning knife from his belt with his broken, splinted hand. He was clumsy, but he was driven by a pure, animal hatred. "You savage!" he hissed, slashing the air. "I should have killed you on the ridge." Nantan did not draw his own knife. He just moved, evading the clumsy swings, his eyes cold. "When I am done with you," Hatch panted, his face purple, "I am going to take that worthless whore. I am going to show her what a real man is." He never finished the sentence. Nantan's rage, held in check, became a cold, precise weapon. He moved. He did not strike. He simply entered, trapping Hatch's knife arm against his own body. His other hand finding Hatch's throat. He squeezed, not to kill, but to silence. Hatch's eyes bulged. He gagged, the knife falling from his numb fingers. Nantan saw it then, hanging from a rawhide cord around Hatch's thick, sweaty neck, a small, crudely carved wooden cross. Nantan ripped it from his neck. He shoved Hatch to his knees, his back to him. With a speed born of pure contempt, Nantan used the rawhide cord, the man's own false piety, to bind his hands. He tied the knot, and he pulled it tight. He left him there, a man choked on his own hypocrisy, and went to the wagon. Honor was wedged inside, bruised, but alive. He put his hands on the bars. "Honor." She saw his face, and the terror of the night finally broke. "Nantan." He braced his feet. With the same strength that had ripped the window from the hall, he tore the damaged cage door from its hinges. He reached in, his hands gentle, and pulled her free. He did not let her go. He held her for 1 full second, his face buried in her singed hair, his heart, which had been a stone, now beating a wild, painful rhythm. From the rocks, the witnesses emerged. Naada, the old storyteller. Jonah, the soldier, his face pale and set. They had horses. They rode for Las Moras, not with stealth, but with the full, thundering sound of a coming judgment. They reached the town by mid-morning. It was not the same town. A new platform had been built, not in the square, but at the dam. Zebediah Pike was standing on it, his black suit brushed, his face a mask of civic concern. He was holding a ceremony. He was officially gifting the dam to the town he had just terrorized. The whole town was there, cowed, silent, and defeated. The reporter from Tucson was at the front, his pencil flying. "And so," Pike was booming, his voice echoing in the dry air, "I dedicate this marvel, this bastion of security, to the future of Las Moras, a future free of fear, free of want." His voice faltered. A space was opening in the crowd. It was not a polite parting. The townspeople were scrambling to get out of the way. Honor McCrae, her face bruised and streaked with soot, her dress torn, walked through them. She was not alone. Behind her was Nantan Kai, his face a judgment. Behind him were the Apache elders, their presence a silent, powerful accusation. Behind them, his head bowed, was the soldier. Jonah. They walked straight to the platform. Pike's face, which had been so full of benevolent pride, collapsed. He saw Honor. He saw Nantan. He saw Hatch's horse, being led by the old woman. He did not see Hatch. "Sheriff!" Pike shrieked, his voice a full octave higher. "Clegg, arrest this woman. She is a fugitive, an arsonist. She is with the savages." Sheriff Clegg fumbled for his pistol, but he did not draw it. The crowd was not with him. The crowd was watching. Honor did not look at Clegg. She looked at Pike. She climbed the steps to the platform, and he fell back, as if she were a ghost. "You forgot your guest, Mr. Pike," she said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was a roar, a raw, broken thing that carried all her pain. "I am not an arsonist," I am a teacher, and this is my final lesson." She held up the dark, indigo-blue cloth Nantan had given her. "The people of this valley, the true people, gave me this, a sign of protection." "Protection," Pike laughed, a high, panicked sound. "Protection from what you are a fool. Your proof is at the bottom of a river. I heard you have nothing." "You heard wrong," Honor said. She found the small, thick seam she had sewn, her fingers clumsy but sure. "The locket I threw, that was for Mr. Hatch, a decoy. He was always a stupid man. He never understood. A woman's finest weapon is her needle." She pulled the thread. From the seam of the sacred cloth, she pulled a tiny, folded piece of dark, transparent film. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, a tiny, fragile, indestructible thing. "This," she said, "is your ledger, Mr. Pike. This is your signature. This is your entire, rotten little world, on a piece of film so small, a man like you could never find it." The crowd was silent. They did not understand. It was too small. Before Pike could speak, the witnesses moved. The old storyteller, led by Naada, stepped onto the platform. He faced the crowd, and he spoke, his English slow, each word a stone. "I am the tongue of my people," he said. "This path, where that man built his wall, it is our church. It is the road we take to honor our dead. It is the road our children take to be born. He pointed a thin, trembling finger at Pike, "has put a lock on the door to God. This is not his." Then Jonah, the soldier, stepped forward, his body shaking. My name is Jonah Smith. I was a private with the 3rd Cavalry. We were posted at the boundary. We knew about the path. We all knew. But Mr. Pike, he paid us. He paid our captain. He paid me $100 to move the survey stakes, to lose the map, to swear that this," he pointed to the dam, "was empty land. I took his money, and I let them. He broke down, sobbing. The crowd erupted. This they understood. A bribe, a soldier's confession. "Lies, all lies," Pike screamed, his face a mask of sweat. "A senile savage and a traitor. This is not proof. You have no proof." "The proof is here. Zebediah." A new voice cut through the chaos. Marla Boone, her face caked with dust but her eyes alive, walked through the crowd. Beside her was Thomas Redbird, his arm in a clean sling, his face a grim smile. "Hatch's men ride wide," Marla said, climbing the steps. "But they are slow. I doubled back, and I brought my last paycheck." She held up a single, water-stained piece of paper. An invoice for security services, signed by Mr. Pike himself, the payment for the men, and the kerosene that burned the hall. Thomas stepped forward. He held up the small, brass detonator cap. "And this is the Apache bomb he was going to set. His signature is on the invoice. Mine is on the cap. Which one do you believe?" The crowd was a single, low growl. They were turning. Pike looked at Clegg, his eyes wide with animal panic. "Do something! This is an unlawful assembly! Shoot them all!" Clegg, his face the color of ash, drew his pistol. He pointed it, his hand shaking, at the crowd, at Honor, at no one. "Disperse in the name of the law! Disperse!" "That is enough, Sheriff." The voice was new. It was cold. It was calm. A tall man in a clean, dark duster stepped through the parting crowd. He was not a rancher. He was not a railman. A silver star was pinned to his vest. "Deputy Marshal Avery," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. "I have been in Tucson. I received a letter, a very detailed letter, from a Miss Honor McCrae some weeks ago. It seems I have arrived just in time." Avery stepped onto the platform. He looked at the tiny piece of film in Honor's hand. "We have machines in Tucson that can read that, ma'am, but I do not think we will need them." He turned to Zebediah Pike. "Zebediah Pike, You are under arrest for conspiracy, mail fraud, destruction of public property, and incitement of a riot. He turned to the ashen-faced sheriff. Sheriff Clegg, you are under arrest for accepting bribes, conspiracy, and false arrest. Clegg looked at his pistol. He looked at the marshal. He looked at the crowd, which was now a silent wall of accusation. He dropped the gun. It clattered on the boards. "This dam," the marshal said, his voice ringing, "is now under federal jurisdiction. All work is halted. This path," he nodded to Naada, "and this spring are hereby protected under the Treaty of 1872. Avery's men, quiet and professional, moved in and cuffed both men. As Pike was led away, shrunken and silent, the crowd did not cheer. The victory was too raw, too costly. Then Silas, the rancher, stepped forward. He looked at Honor, his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick. "Miss Honor, we called you. We are sorry." Honor did not seem to hear him. She was just standing, Nantan at her side, the tiny piece of film still clutched in her hand. Into that sudden, profound silence, a new sound entered. It was not the sound of hammers. It was not the sound of wind. It was not the sound of a preacher's lie or a rich man's promise. It was the sound of the agua de cielo, the heaven spring, choked, battered, but not dead. It was still trickling over the rocks, a small, stubborn, silver thread of truth. The water was speaking, and this time, the valley was listening. The world, which had held its breath in a single, sharp moment of judgment, exhaled. The sound was a collective, ragged sigh from the crowd. Marshal Avery, a man of quiet efficiency, did not linger. Zebediah Pike and Sheriff Clegg, both silent and gray-faced, were put on the first wagon, bound for Tucson and the federal court. They were the big catch. Louis Hatch, found tied and raging by the stone bridge, was a different matter. Faced with the testimony of Nantan Kai and the clear evidence of kidnapping, Hatch did what all rats do when cornered. He made a deal. To save himself from a rope, he sang. He gave Marshal Avery the names, the dates, and the accounts of the entire network Pike had built. He exposed the land grabbers, the bought politicians, and the silent partners in Tucson. His confession, given in a low, bitter monotone, dismantled Pike's iron and paper empire in less than an hour. The hardest reckoning, however, was a quiet one. The Sunday after the arrests, Father Devereaux stood at his pulpit. The church was not full. It was half empty. The people who came not for comfort, but for an answer. He did not give them a sermon. He did not boom or call on God. He just stood, his hands gripping the wood, his face old and tired. "I failed," he said, his voice a low, cracking thing. I told myself that a great work, a railroad, was the work of God, and I mistook the glitter of Mr. Pike's gold for the light of heaven. I took his money, for the orphans. I said, but it was for my own pride. He looked at the back pew, where Honor McCrae had once sat. I used my position to condemn a good woman, and to bless a wicked man. I ask forgiveness, not from God. He will judge me. I ask it of you. I ask it of Miss Honor McCrae. He bowed his head, and the silence that followed was heavier than any prayer. The town, shamed and raw, had to rebuild its own soul. The county council, now purged of Pike's men, held an emergency session. They did not meet in the burned-out hall. They met at the spring, in the open air. Naada and the Apache elders were there. Silas and the ranchers were there. Honor, Nantan, Marla, and Thomas were there. The council did not debate. They listened. The old storyteller spoke again of the path. Jonah, the soldier, gave his testimony, his voice clear and steady. Marla Boone, using her blueprints, explained the aquifer. And Honor, her voice hoyt, read from her simple, Black-inked ledger. She read the water levels. The dead fish. The truth. That afternoon, the council signed the Agua de Cielo Community Charter. It was the first of its kind in the territory. It was not a long document. It was simple. It established the spring and its path as a protected public trust, to be shared by all people of the valley, forever. It outlawed any dam, any diversion, any commercial use. And at the bottom, under the signatures, they added a new line: First Protector and Witness Honor McCrae. Her name was not worthless anymore. It was law. The next morning, a small, shuffling delegation of women, the same women who had whispered and laughed, came to her shack. They stood outside, twisting their bonnets in their hands, until she came to the door. The saloon keeper's wife, the one who had called her a delusional virgin, was their spokeswoman. She could not meet Honor's eyes. "Miss McCrae," she said, staring at the ground. The children, they are running wild. They missed the lessons." She took a ragged breath. "We was wrong. What the father did, what Mr. Pike did, they led us wrong. We ask, if you would take them back." Honor looked at their faces, pinched with shame and a desperate, needful hope. She had seen this look before. It was the look of the thirsty. "Yes," Honor said, her voice still rough from the smoke. "I will take them back, but the schoolhouse is gone." "We will build it," Silas's wife said, too quickly. "We will build it bigger." "We will," Honor agreed. "But until then, the lessons will be here, at the spring, and we will not just be reading from the Bible. We will be reading from this." She held up the new charter. "We will learn to read, and we will learn to write, and we will learn what our rights are. We will learn about water, and we will learn about land, and we will learn to read a liar's signature." The women nodded. It was not the school they had asked for, but they knew it was the school they needed. The mending of the valley began not with a hammer, but with a drum. The Apache, led by Naada, came down from the high rocks. They came to the spring to hold a sun thanksgiving. They came to thank the earth for water and for witnesses. They invited the town, not the rich, not the railroad, but the town, the poor ranchers, the women, the children. It was a strange, quiet gathering. There was no shared language. At first, there was only a shared place. Naada directed them. She had them all find a single, smooth, white stone from the dry riverbed. They formed a circle around the spring, Apache and settler, side by side. One by one, they went to the water's edge. The old storyteller began a low, soft chant. Naada spoke. "We name the ones who lived," she said. Silas stepped forward. He placed his stone. "My son, Silas Jr., he lived." A woman in a faded gingham dress stepped forward. "My daughter, Mary, she lived." An Apache woman, her face like a beautiful, cracked piece of pottery, placed her stone. She did not say a name. She just touched her heart, and then the stone. They were building a new boundary, not a wall, but a circle of memory, built of white stones, naming the survivors of the drought that Pike, and their own fear, had created. While the town was at the spring, Nantan Kai was at the shack. He had been there all morning, his face set, his hands busy. When Honor returned, weary and full of a strange, quiet peace, she stopped. The stench of yellow paint was gone. The raw, splintered wood of the word worthless was gone. Nantan had replaced the entire front wall. The new wood was good wood, cedar, and it smelled clean and sharp, like the mountains. He was on the roof, lashing down the final piece of the new frame, the one he had built to replace his temporary pine boughs. He did not use rawhide. He was using good, clean rope. He moved with a focused, efficient grace. He was building. He was nesting. He looked down and saw her watching him. He climbed down from the roof, his boots hitting the earth with a soft thud. He was not the warrior from the ridge. He was not the avenger from the hall. He was just a man, his hands stained with wood dust, a small, hopeful splinter in his palm. "The roof will hold now," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said, her hand going to the new, smooth wood of the wall. It is beautiful, Nantan." He nodded, accepting the compliment as a simple statement of fact. He looked at her, and a strange, unpracticed shyness came over him. "I found this." He held out the indigo-dyed cloth, the one Na'ada had given her, the one that had held the proof. It was clean, washed in the spring, and folded. "It should not be in a box," he said, his voice low. "A thing like this. It is a sign. It is your sign." He looked at the new, clean cedar post that held up the porch roof. If it pleases you, I would hang it here, on the porch, where the valley can see it, where it belongs." Honor looked at the cloth. She looked at the post. She looked at him. He was not asking to hang a piece of fabric. He was asking for a permanent place. He was asking, in his own way, to stay. "Yes," she whispered. "It pleases me very much." He took a small wooden pin from his pouch and carefully, respectfully, he hung the blue cloth. It fluttered, a small patch of deep, mountain sky blue, against the warm, new wood. It was an invitation. It was a flag of a new nation. "Marla is staying," Honor said quietly, her shoulder just brushing his as they looked at the new wall. "I know," he said. "Thomas told me. She is good with wood. She and Jonah. They will build. The town needs a carpenter more than it needs a priest right now. And Thomas, he will not stay. He is a wanderer." "He will lead the spring patrol," Nantan said, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "He will wander, but he will wander with a purpose now. He will guard the charter." "And you?" she asked, her voice so quiet she was afraid he had not heard her. "Are you a wanderer?" "Nantan ki." He was silent for a long time. He looked at the high ridges, the ridges that had been his only home. The freedom of that emptiness called to him. It was a pull as strong as his own heartbeat. He had always been a man who moved. To stay. It was a thing he did not understand. It felt like a chain. He looked down at Honor. He looked at her bandaged hand, where his own bandage had been. He looked at the new clean wall. He looked at the blue cloth, his sky, on her porch. "Freedom," Honor said softly, as if hearing his thoughts, "is not just leaving. It is not just the high ridges. Nantan, freedom is choosing where your heart is not chained." He turned to her, and the struggle was gone. He looked at her, and he was home. "My heart," he said, his voice rough, "is not chained. It is here. It is with you." The children, her students, came running up the path. They were laughing. They had been to the spring. They carried a new sign, one they had made themselves from a bedsheet and sticks. They were clumsy, and they were beautiful. They planted their sign in the dirt next to Honor's porch. It was the same word they had laid in stones. Home. This time, it was bigger, and they had painted paper flags all around it. That night, there was no fear. The air was cool and clean. The sound of the railroad was a distant, irrelevant thing. Honor sat on her new porch, her hand in his, and they watched the moon. It was full. It was bright. It climbed the sky and it struck the surface of the agua de cielo. The water, now running free, was a flat, perfect silver mirror. But it was not reflecting the cold, distant stars or the false, angry glitter of the railroad. It was reflecting the small, bent shape of old Silas, come to fill his bucket. It was reflecting the face of Na'ada, who was singing a soft, quiet song. It was reflecting the faces of the valley, finally, at peace. They did not have a wedding. They had a promise, made in the open air, where it counted. The sun was high, and it was the first day of the new moon. They stood at the edge of the Agua de Cielo, by the circle of white stones that the community had laid. The town was there, Naada was there, and the Apache elders. Silas was there, his hat in his hand, his wife beside him. Jonah and Thomas stood together, one a builder, one a guardian. Marla Boone, her hands now calloused from the saw and the plane, not the drill, stepped forward. She carried no flowers. She carried 2 thin, simple bands of copper, hammered and polished until they shone like new pennies. She had made them herself. "Copper," she said, her voice rough, "is a good conductor. It carries the heat. It carries the lightning. You two, you are good conductors." She gave one to Nantan. She gave one to Honor. They did not speak vows. They did not need them. Nantan slid the warm copper ring onto Honor's finger. It was not a claim. It was an anchor. Honor slid the other ring onto his. It was not a chain. It was a home. The old storyteller, the one whose name was a song, came forward. He did not carry a Bible. He carried a handful of sweet green grass, braided into 2 thin cords. He took Honor's wrist. He took Nantan's. He tied them together, loosely with the grass, a bond that was as strong and as fragile as the living earth. "It is done," he said in his own tongue. Naada, beside him, translated in a whisper, "What the water has joined, the mountain cannot break." They were now a family. The next day, Honor held her first class at the new building. It was not a shack, and it was not just a school. It was both. Marla and Jonah had built it, halfway between the spring and the site of her old home. One side was a classroom, with a real salvaged blackboard and 3 long benches. The other side was a water station, a cool, covered porch where the town's water barrels were kept, filled every morning by Tomas and his patrol. On the new roof, they had hung a small brass bell. It was not a church bell. It was a warning bell. It was tied to a float in the main cistern. If the water level dropped too low, the bell would ring, a clear, high sound that would echo through the valley. It was a bell of shared responsibility. Her 7 students were there, their faces scrubbed, and with them, sitting shyly in the back, were 3 of the mothers who had once whispered. Honor stood before them, a piece of chalk in her hand. She looked at the children, then at the women. "My name is Honor," she said, her voice soft and clear in the new, pine-scented room. The women looked down, ashamed. "They used to call me names," Honor continued, her gaze gentle. "But a name is just a word, until you live it. Your honor, it is not something other people can give you, and it is not something they can take away." She looked at the saloon keeper's wife. "It is the thing you build, every day. It is the wall you mend. It is the promise you keep. It is the truth you tell, even when your voice shakes." She smiled, a small, new smile. "Now, today's lesson is not a name. It is a number. Let us learn to count. Let us count how many gallons are in the cistern and how many we can spare. Let us learn to be good accountants." While she taught, Nantan worked. He was not on the roof. He was on the porch of their shack. He had taken his sharpest, smallest knife, and he was carving. He was not a man of many words, but his hands knew how to speak. He carved into the main cedar post, the one that held the blue indigo cloth. He was not a grand artist. His lines were deep and simple and true. He carved 3 shapes. First, he carved the shape of a flowing stream, the water, the life that had been given back to them. Next, he carved a hand, open, its palm up, the human hand, the one that had held the pen, the one that had laid the stone, the one that received the water. And last, he carved a line, a path that connected them. The stream flowed into the hand, and the hand protected the path. It was his own covenant, carved in wood. The water feeds the hand protects the path leads home. The lessons at the spring continued. Honor's ledger, the one that had been a weapon, was now a history book. The new generation, her spring students, were the ones who kept it. At the end of the first week, after the last class, a small girl stayed behind. It was Silas's youngest daughter, the one who had asked if the water was sleeping. She came forward, her hands clutched behind her back. She was holding a single, small, perfect bough of cypress. It was green and smelled of resin and high, clean places. "Miss Honor," she whispered, holding it out. This is for your roof. My pa says it is the strongest wood. It is the wood that never rots." Honor knelt, and her throat was thick. "Thank you, Mary, thank you." "It is," the little girl said, her voice earnest. "So your roof will never, ever be broken again." Honor took the bough. She did not cry. She just held the gift, a promise from the future. And for the first time, she knew the child was right. Her roof would hold. That night, the first rain of the new season came. It was not a storm, not a violent, electric war. It was a slow, steady, soaking rain. A promise, kept. Nantan and Honor sat on their porch, the blue cloth dark with water, and listened to the sound of life returning. He turned to her. The day was done. The teaching was done. The building was done. He was just a man, sitting with his wife. She had a smudge of chalk dust on her cheek, a small, white crescent, like a sliver of chalk. He did not speak. He did not need to. He reached out, his hand now as familiar to her as her own. His fingers, rough and warm, found her face. It was a habit now, this small, private language. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. His fingers brushed the chalk from her cheekbone. It was not a gesture of passion. It was a gesture of fact. You are here. I am here. We are real. He leaned in, and she met him, and they touched their foreheads together. A silent thank you. A silent forever. They smiled. A small, shared breath in the rain-washed dark. The valley was quiet. The future would come. The rains would come, and the droughts would come again. The railroad was still there, a distant iron spine. But now, the valley had a memory. It had a charter, signed and sealed. It had a bell, tied to the water, to warn it of its own thirst. It had an alliance, built of stone and trust, and it had a story. They had called her worthless. They had called her a virgin, an agitator, a whore. The spring, now running free and deep, called her by another name. It called her a ghost Tan, the one who guards the water. And he, Nantan Kai, the man who had seen her, the man who had chosen, he just called her his own. Forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I have put my heart into this one, and I truly hope it touched yours. I am always amazed by where these stories travel, and I would love to connect with you. Please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from today, and share any thoughts you had. If you enjoyed this tale, it would mean the world to me if you would consider subscribing to the channel, Wild West Tales. Be sure to give this video a like. And if you really want to help this story be heard by more folks, please hit that hype button. Your support makes all of this possible. Thank you.